Do you remember in episode 1 what I said about that feeling? The one you get when you finally have what you wanted, the trip, the trophy, the moment you worked for, and then a little time passes and something in you is already asking, is this it? Is there something more? I use Disney as my example, but the feeling itself is not about Disney, and it's not about any one thing. It's a feeling that kind of follows you. You know what I'm talking about. You want something, you get it, the feeling fades, and you're already moving towards the next thing, hoping that that one other thing will finally be the one that satisfies it. Most people treat that feeling like a problem to be solved. Find the right relationship, the right career, the right experience, and the longing will go away. But what if the longing isn't your brain being faulty? What if it's trying to tell you something? Blaise Pascal was a 17th century French mathematician and philosopher, one of the sharpest minds in European history, and he wrote something that has stayed with people for 400 years. He said that inside every person there is a void, an emptiness, that nothing in this world can fill. He believed that people spend their entire lives trying to fill it with everything except the one thing that can fully satisfy. That void, that empty feeling, that's what this episode is about. Before we get into the argument about what that feeling might be pointing to, I want to be clear about something. That feeling is not unique to you. It's not a product of your generation, your culture, or your circumstances. It's one of the most documented human experiences in history. Here are 4 people who felt exactly what you feel, but they're from completely different centuries, different continents, and who live completely different lives. The first is Solomon. He's the author of the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, writing roughly 3,000 years ago. He was a king, wealthy beyond imagination, powerful, surrounded by every pleasure available to a person in the ancient world. And he opens his book with this: vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Everything I've pursued, everything I have achieved, it amounts to nothing that lasts. He had everything and it wasn't enough. The second is Augustine of Hippo. He lived in the 4th century in North Africa. He was brilliant, restless, ambitious. He spent years pursuing philosophy, pleasure, and status. He was convinced that the right combination of experiences would finally give him what he was looking for. It never did. And eventually, he wrote the line that survived 1,600 years. Our heart is restless until it rests in thee. He wasn't describing a religious feeling. He was describing an ache that he carried his whole life, and only one thing ever addressed it. The third is Pascal, the same man that I mentioned in the introduction. I bring him back because this was not a passing thought for him. He spent his entire life wrestling with it. The emptiness, the void, the sense that no matter what you accumulate or achieve, something is still missing. He could not let it go because it would not let go of him. The fourth is C.S. Lewis. I've mentioned him before in the series. He lived in the 20th century in Oxford. He was a former atheist, literary scholar, one of the most rigorous minds in his era. He spent decades chasing a particular feeling he couldn't name, a longing, a sense of something just beyond reach that vanished the moment he thought he'd found it. He called it joy, not happiness, but something deeper and more elusive. And the purpose of it was one of the things that eventually led him to God. 4 people, different centuries, different continents, different circumstances, all describing the same thing. That's worth paying attention to. In episode 1, I introduced you to C.S. Lewis' argument from desire. That's the idea that no creature is born with a desire for something that doesn't exist. We touched on it briefly, now I want to go deeper into it. Lewis noticed a pattern in the way natural desires work. If you feel hungry, food exists. If you feel thirsty, water exists. If you feel the desire for connection, other people exist. Every natural desire, the kind that's built into human beings across every culture and every era, points towards a corresponding reality. The desire is not an accident. It's a signal that something real exists to satisfy it. But then there's this. As human beings, we all carry a desire that nothing in this world ever fully satisfies. Not success, not love, not experience, not achievement, not knowledge. Every one of those things offers a partial satisfaction and the longing returns. You felt this. Every honest person who's ever lived has felt this. So Lewis asks the question, what do we do with the desire that points beyond everything this world can offer? His answer is this. If every other natural desire points towards a real corresponding satisfaction, the most reasonable conclusion is that this desire points to something real too. And if nothing in the physical world satisfies it, then what it's pointing towards is not in the physical world. Here's the point. If every other built-in human desire points towards something real, there's no good reason to think that this one's the exception. Now, Lewis knew that there are 2 obvious objections to that because he had lived both of them personally. The first objection is the one we already talked about in episode 3. Maybe this longing is just an evolutionary glitch. Maybe it's a leftover accident from millions of years of human development that produced a feeling without anything real behind it. In other words, your brain is misfiring. There's nothing actually out there, you just feel like there is. Lewis considered that very seriously, but here's the problem with it. If the longing is just a glitch, if it's just some random noise your brain produces with no real signal behind it, then it doesn't mean anything and it doesn't point to anything. It's the same as the sneeze. It's just a physical response to something in the air. But you know that the longing isn't a glitch because that longing, that emptiness you feel inside is what you spend your entire life trying to fill. And you know that no achievement, no relationship, no life experience has ever been able to fully satisfy that inner emptiness. And that emptiness leads you into one of two directions. It either motivates you to get out of bed in the morning or it leads you to despair. Either way, you know that it's there and it feels like the most important thing that you've ever felt. The fact that it feels that it's telling you something is itself evidence that it might actually be doing just that. The second objection feels the most reasonable. Maybe you just haven't found the right thing yet. Maybe the thing that finally satisfies that longing is still out there waiting for you. Lewis didn't argue against this by saying it was impossible. He argued against it by saying that he had tried it and it didn't work. He spent years pursuing exactly that. He tried one thing after another, each thing promising to be the one that finally filled that emptiness inside. But none of them did. Not because they were bad choices, but because they were simply not designed to do that job. His argument is that he tried everything he possibly could and nothing worked. Nothing ever fully satisfied him. Now, before we go any further, I want to make sure you know what this argument is not saying. This isn't me saying that because you want God to exist, he does. That's not the argument. That would just be wishful thinking. Wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. I could really want $1 million in my bank account right now. That doesn't mean it's there. So the argument is not, I feel this longing, therefore God exists. That doesn't follow, and Lewis would be the first to tell you that. Here's what the argument actually is. It's about a very simple pattern. Every built-in human desire, hunger, thirst, the need for connection, point towards something real that can satisfy it. That's the pattern. And Lewis is saying that this deep longing, the one that nothing in this world ever fully satisfies, follows the same pattern. It's pointing towards something real, but that something real is outside of this world. That's it. That's the argument. It's not a guarantee. It's just a pattern that is worth taking seriously. And one more thing I want to be clear about. This argument is not saying that if you become a Christian, the longing goes away, because it doesn't. Not completely. Even the greatest saints in Christian history wrote about periods of deep emptiness and spiritual dryness, times when God felt completely absent from their lives even after a lifetime of faith. The longing simply doesn't switch off. What does change is this: you finally have a name for what you've been feeling. You know what it's pointing towards, and that changes everything about how you live with that feeling. Now I want to tell you something personal. A little over 10 years ago, I was a successful banker. I had a really nice house in a beautiful neighborhood, a nice car, a supportive family. In the eyes of the world, I'd made it. But I wasn't just unhappy, I was miserable. I hated my job. My house had become a place that just stores all my stuff. My car just got me to work and back because I was always working. Something was missing and I couldn't put my finger on it. So I did what I always do when something isn't working in my life. I'm a big believer that everything is figure-outable, and that if I wanted a different result in my life, I had to try something different. So I did. I did something I would have never done if I hadn't been so desperately unhappy. I signed up for a spiritual retreat. 3.5 days, no work, no phone, no outside contact, completely out of my element, completely out of my control. Now, I've been a believer my entire life. I'm a cradle Catholic. I grew up in the church, but this was different. I can't fully explain what happened in that retreat, and I'm not sure I need to. What I can tell you is this. I walked out of there and my circumstances were exactly the same. Same job, same house, same car. But how I saw all of it was completely different. The emptiness was gone. For the first time, I had a name for what I had been feeling and a sense of what my life was actually for. And that changed everything. And now I see my old self in other people all the time. I see it in my teens. I see it in my friends. I see it in my family. I recognize that look. The one that says that I have everything I'm supposed to want and something is still missing. And what I want them to know, what I want you to know, what I wish somebody had told me is that that emptiness has a name and it's pointing somewhere. So if you're feeling lost right now or empty or like something is missing and you can't quite name it, I want you to hear this. That's not a bad place to be. That might be exactly where you need to be, because I don't think the longing is the enemy of faith. I think it might be where faith begins. Now let's do a quick recap where we are up to now. Over the last 3 episodes, we've worked through 3 of the 4 big questions that I laid out in episode 1. Why is there something rather than nothing? The universe had a beginning that points beyond itself. Why does injustice feel objectively wrong? Objective moral truth exists, and it needs a foundation outside of us. And the deepest human longing, the one that nothing in this world satisfies, point towards something no created thing can fill. 3 questions, 3 arguments. None of these arguments on their own proves everything, but together they're all pointing in the same direction. And if you're being honest with yourself, that's hard to ignore. But I know what you're probably thinking right now, because it's the question that makes more people walk away from faith than almost anything else. If God is real and he's good and he's powerful, why does he allow a child to get cancer? Why does he allow war? Why does he allow the kinds of suffering that makes you want to look away? If he could stop it and doesn't, what kind of God is that? That's not a small question. It's probably the hardest one in this entire series, and it deserves more than a quick answer. So I'm giving it its own episode. Episode 5 is called If God Exists, Why Is There So Much Evil? And we're going to take it seriously. All of it. If this episode gave you something to think about, hit the like button. It genuinely helps others find the series. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone carrying that longing around without a name for it, share this with them. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do for someone is show them that they're not the only one who feels it. I'll see you in the next one.